Our story begins with two boys who were lying on the ground in an unknown place. The surrounding environment was mysterious and gloomy, shrouded in shadows and uncertainty. One of them held a knife tightly, as if it were a last resort defense. At that moment, a young man suddenly appears, and soon someone can be heard shouting desperately for him to stop that, for him to cease his actions once and for all. The young man, with an enigmatic expression, slowly raises his head. His eyes shone intensely and enigmatically. After a moment of tension, he seems to regain his composure and returns to his normal state. However, before the situation could get completely out of control, the knife was thrown with force downwards, embedding itself deeply into the wall, leaving a metallic sound echoing throughout the place. The other boy, still dazed and confused, anxiously asks if the young man was okay and, in the midst of that chaotic situation, who he was. Confusion and despair were present in the air. The young man, with a pained expression, mentions that his head was throbbing intensely and asks why he was feeling that immense and unbearable pain. The second boy, equally distressed, reveals that he was also suffering from a terrible headache. The realization that they both shared the same affliction brings a brief moment of mutual understanding. However, faced with this disconcerting situation, they realized that there was not much that could be done at that moment. After all, the revelation that everyone there was under the influence of some mysterious drug added an even more complex and disturbing layer to a situation that was already, in itself, confusing and terrifying. The boy, confused, asks the young man if he had fallen asleep drunk and what had happened to him at that moment. Unintentionally, he steps on the other's leg, who lets out a groan of pain. Even so, he is grateful for being saved, even if he didn't understand exactly how or by whom. Deciding to take the lead, the young man warns that they should be careful at that moment. The boy then asks what was going on with the other guy, but his main concern was where they were. He questions where they were in the world and why they weren't in their own rooms, sleeping. Suddenly, he feels something strange coming from a distant direction. Looking back, he realizes that the situation was even more surreal than he imagined. There were soldiers lying on the ground, bodies scattered everywhere. In the middle of that chaotic scene, he sees a girl and other young people lying down. The boy's mind is in turmoil. He wonders what happened, if it was a dream or a nightmare he needed to wake up from. He wanted to organize his thoughts, but nothing seemed clear. Suspicious that he might have been drinking heavily the night before, he also considers the possibility that he was kidnapped. Suddenly, a noise interrupts your thoughts. Deciding to investigate, he approaches cautiously. He discovers another girl, this time with her arms tied. She was clearly scared and confused, and he realized that the situation was much more serious than he had imagined. With his heart racing, he knew he needed to act quickly to understand what was happening and find a way out of that terrifying situation. She looked at the young man, scared and almost crying. He asks if she is okay and tries to reassure her, saying that he is there to help her. However, she screams, asking him not to come closer. Confused, he takes a few steps back, respecting her request. When she sees the knife in his hands, she becomes even more scared, which makes him question why there was a knife in that place and how it got there. He looks at the knife more closely and feels a vague memory. A scene begins to form in your mind, a young man with glowing eyes coming out of somewhere and breaking walls, leaving a trail of destruction. The army, in panic, ordered that he be detained at any cost, that he should not be allowed to escape under any circumstances. But it was too late. The mysterious young man, with superhuman strength, holds the head of one of the soldiers and brutally crushes it. The other soldiers, terrified by what they were witnessing, retreated, unable to believe what they were seeing. He begins to remember more clearly. The scene was one of absolute chaos. One of the soldiers shouted, asking how it would be possible to stop a monster like that. The situation seemed ridiculous and desperate. Without reinforcements, everyone there was doomed, and on top of that, they were still poorly paid to face such a threat. The memory leaves the young man in shock, and he tries to piece together the fragments of memory to understand how it all connects to the current situation. As he tries to process all of this, he turns back to the tied-up girl. She remains scared, but he approaches slowly, leaving the knife aside to show that he poses no threat. He knows he needs to find out more about what's going on and, more importantly, find a way out of this nightmare before it's too late. The mysterious man realizes that there was something else behind them, something he hadn't noticed before. He sees that everyone was undergoing intense and painful mutations. The people around him screamed in agony, their voices filled with despair and pain. They said it was an unbearable pain, as if their bodies were being torn apart from the inside. Among these people, there were those with their mouths sewn shut, their eyes deformed, and their faces disfigured. The sight was terrifying, as if they were victims of a macabre experiment. To make matters worse, many said they felt as if their bodies were about to melt, transforming into something unrecognizable. They fervently blamed those who had subjected them to such torments. The crowd of mutilated people, now desperate and seeking revenge, began to advance towards the soldiers. The soldiers' screams were of pure despair and terror as they tried futilely to retreat. Finally, these deformed beings were about to achieve their freedom, something that had long been denied them. Amidst the chaos, a young man stood out and spoke with determination that now was the time to start with what they had planned. Beside him, a completely stitched-up girl, with every piece of her skin held together by grotesque lines, began to do something that seemed to be of paramount importance. The tension in the air was palpable, and everyone knew something monumental was about to happen. The young man then, in an agile and precise movement, cuts off the girl's head. Without hesitation, he prepares himself and cuts off another person's arm, quickly advancing towards one of the other young men, whom he seriously injures by cutting him in half. In a frenzy of violence, he continues to decapitate another individual with incredible speed and dexterity, wielding the knife with deadly skill. In the midst of the chaos, one of the survivors, in a state of shock and despair, asks the young man why he was doing that. "Why are you killing your own comrades? We're all on the same side," he exclaims, trying to understand the motivation behind that brutality. However, the young man also does not hesitate to kill this survivor, leaving the question hanging in the air. He then wonders aloud, apparently to himself, whether he really was on the same side as those individuals he had just eliminated. Suddenly, the narrative transports itself back to the present. The boy, now confused and with a splitting headache, wonders if those terrible scenes are really his memories. Your head is throbbing intensely, a pain that seems almost unbearable. At that moment, the girl next to him asks if he doesn't have a stomachache or nausea. He confirms this, saying that he seems to have had too much to drink last night and that perhaps that is the reason for his discomfort. The girl, worried, mentions that the headache could be a side effect of the medication he is taking. She notes that although his maximum capacity seems high, he is undergoing some kind of mutation. With a tone of urgency, she suggests that he spare himself. She promises to take him to a room where there is an inhibitor that can help control his condition. The protagonist, confused, asks where he is and why that little girl was there. He wants to know what she was doing and what she was talking about the medicine. Nothing made sense to him. At this moment, he begins to hear cries for help coming from somewhere nearby. The girl explains that there was a test subject there, and if they continued like that, everyone would be annihilated. The tension in the air increases, but the protagonist, despite his confusion, decides to accept the situation and move on. The girl, with a tone of urgency, mentions that a mysterious wave had hit the protagonist repeatedly, awakening all the test subjects at once. She adds that there are currently no special hunters at the Institute, which makes the situation desperate. The protagonist, even more confused, asks about the awakened test subjects. He begins to vaguely remember something the wave, the awakening of the test subjects. The girl's words bring back a distant memory. No one could survive the awakening of these test subjects. Then, as if a veil is lifted from his mind, He remembers that this was all part of a game he created, Mystic World, a single-player VR MMORPG game. He had designed this scenario within the game world, a place where mysterious waves awaken test subjects, creating a situation of chaos and despair. Upon understanding the connection, the protagonist realizes that perhaps he is trapped inside the very game he created, or that his memories and the reality around him are somehow intertwined with the Mystic World plot. He feels a headache intensify, perhaps a side effect of the medication or the mutations his body was undergoing. The girl, still by his side, reiterates the importance of taking him to the room where there is an inhibitor to control his condition and perhaps find a way to get out of that nightmare alive. This was the game he had created, a project built through a lot of hard work and the help of several people, including scientists and research institutes. They contributed to the development of the initial scenario, where a villainous character emerged. If he really was in his own game now, the situation was even more disturbing. He had drunk a lot, which explained why he didn't remember how he got there. Relieved in a way, he recognized that it looked like a real crime scene, something that shouldn't be happening within a game. The girl next to him, frightened by the protagonist's condition, observes that he looked strange. She also realizes that something was wrong, that laboratory was not part of the game's initial plans. Even in the context of the game, the laboratory should just be an event from the past, and only the exterior should be present, not in ruins and in such a chaotic situation. As he tries to understand how this was possible, he remembers that he had canceled a time travel mission to the laboratory. Had the developers done this just out of revenge? He gets lost in thought, trying to connect the dots. The girl, worried, asks what he was mumbling at that moment and why he doesn't try to rest for a while. He considers the idea, but she says she can't because she's too scared. She mentions that she still remembers him, which increases the protagonist's confusion. He wonders if she is talking about Si-yoon Kim, a researcher he knew. The revelation that she still remembers Si-yoon Kim leaves the protagonist in shock. He knew that Si-yoon Kim was a key character in the development of the game's plot, someone who had contributed significantly to the creation of the dark and complex scenario he now faced. The protagonist's mind races, trying to make sense of the situation, questioning himself about reality and the game, and wondering how he could get out of that situation. However, there is an important revelation to be made. She was, in fact, the daughter of one of the main heads of the laboratories, a position of great prominence and responsibility. She was charged with the crucial task of managing the physical abilities of the test subjects, a role that required precision, knowledge, and great skill. In a moment of tension, she asks, with a mix of curiosity and suspicion, how he knew all this confidential information. She was no ordinary NPC. She was an elite NPC, standing out among the many characters in this complex and intricate world. Her story began in an unwelcoming place, an environment that was not one of the best possible scenarios, suggesting difficulties and challenges from the beginning. As the situation unfolds, it becomes clear that they will need special care and extra attention. This is due to the fact that there is a really strong, intimidating presence in the laboratory, a figure that cannot be underestimated. Curious and perhaps a little worried, she asks about this formidable man. He is identified by the number S21, a code that hides a story full of secrets. His name, Lee Han, is known and feared, as he is one of the 12 villains condemned in this world. Lee Han possesses an amount of magical power comparable to that of a final boss, an indicator of his immense power and potential for destruction. Although, at this particular point in the game, he may not seem as strong as one would hope for a final challenge, he still poses a significant threat, a danger that should not be ignored. Physically, Lee Han is described as having intense black hair, which contrasts with his deep, bright charcoal eyes. This description gives him a mysterious and perhaps somewhat menacing appearance, further highlighting the danger he poses to those around him. And then, if you can recognize it right away, confusion ensues. She, still processing the information, asks if he is really suggesting that they should be careful with test subject S21. He responds firmly, stating that, of course, S21 is the most dangerous person involved in this particular event. At that exact moment, the protagonist's badge, which he had not yet noticed, reveals something surprising. He himself was identified as S21. Before they can delve deeper into this revelation, an imposing figure, a member of the army, appears. He addresses the researcher, asking if she was there and if there were still test subjects nearby. The protagonist, intrigued by the situation and the aggressive approach, asks the soldier what was happening. The army man, with a stern look and firm voice, states that the protagonist is a monster and orders him to get away from the researcher immediately, referring to him as S21. The protagonist, confused and surprised by the accusation, insists that he is not test subject S21. He tries to explain that, in fact, he is a player, someone from outside this world, who is trying to save the researcher from imminent danger. Stating that the soldier was talking nonsense, he points around, highlighting that all the bodies were dead before his arrival. However, the soldier maintains his position, insisting that all those bodies were victims of the protagonist, accusing him of being responsible for the deaths. He calls him a monster again and declares that he would avenge all his dead companions at that moment. The tension reaches its peak when the soldier, driven by a desire for revenge, prepares to act. In the midst of this chaotic situation, the protagonist realizes that his words are having no effect. He tries one last time to explain that he is not S21, but a player, an external element trying to interact and save lives. However, his explanation falls on deaf ears, and the situation quickly deteriorates into an inevitable confrontation. The researcher, observing the unfolding of events, also finds herself in a dilemma, torn between the cold logic of the facts and the growing distrust that the situation instigates. The environment becomes a cauldron of emotions and uncertainties, while each character deals with their own truths and perceptions of reality. Wait a moment, what was going on? Could this be a game error? The protagonist was fully aware that he was a player, someone outside this virtual world. In that instant, time seemed to have stopped as he processed the situation. The soldier, about to attack him with an axe, a rudimentary and brutal weapon, advanced with all his strength. The protagonist, in a quick and instinctive reaction, dodged downwards, avoiding the fatal blow. Amidst the chaos, he began to question his own body. Was everything okay with him? He then decided to look at a reflection in a floating mirror that was passing by him. What he saw left him astonished. His eyes shone brightly, and his hair was as black as coal. The face he saw reflected actually belonged to the villain created within the game, the one he knew as S21. Doubt took over his mind. Could he be the villain? But what would be the reason for this transformation? Before he could find answers, he had to dodge another ferocious attack from the soldier. The army man, with blind fury, tried incessantly to reach the protagonist. However, the researcher intervened, begging the soldier to stop. But the soldier, consumed by rage, shouted for the protagonist to die at that moment and struck a direct blow with his sword. The blow hit the protagonist's chest, and he felt excruciating pain. Quickly, his eyes began to shine even more intensely, a reaction that left the researcher even more confused and scared. What was happening? How could the protagonist, even injured, continue fighting? Taken by an unknown force, the protagonist advanced with relentless determination. Even with a deep cut on his chest, he managed to approach the soldier and, with a precise and powerful movement, elbowed the attacker in the head. The impact was so strong that the soldier's helmet broke, and he fell dead instantly. The researcher, witnessing all this, was paralyzed with shock. She couldn't understand how the protagonist, a player, could have such power and fury. The reality around them seemed increasingly distorted and incomprehensible. The protagonist, in turn, looked at his hands, now stained with blood, and realized that the line between player and villain was increasingly blurred. The protagonist, still shocked by what he had just done, apologizes to the researcher. he explains, his voice trembling and full of remorse that he didn't want to hurt anyone. Guilt and confusion take over his mind as he tries to process the idea of being a villain. It wasn't what it seemed, he says, trying to justify his desperate actions. I didn't want to do that. He continues to wonder what the villain could be like. Why was this happening? At that moment, a strong wind passes through the environment, shaking everything around and intensifying the feeling of disorientation. That's weird, he thinks out loud. Why am I playing the villain? No, that can't be true. Determined to better understand the situation, he decides to check his own condition. It opens the game status window, a feature that allows you to see all the detailed information about your character. The characteristics revealed are shocking. His body is collapsing, parallel accumulation of mana and blood, hero summoning. His physical and magical abilities are low, and he has no points left to distribute. The status sheet confirms your most feared suspicions. He really is the villain of the story. Next to his name, he sees Lee Baebju written. Is that his real name? What is happening? He wonders, feeling a mix of desperation and curiosity. While he is absorbed in his thoughts and in the status window, the researcher, still confused and suspicious, asks him what he was doing there alone. The protagonist remembers that, according to the game's settings, no one other than awakened players could see or access the status window. He responds quickly, trying not to arouse further suspicion. I'm not doing anything, he says, trying to sound convincing. In the midst of this tension, a strange figure appears on the horizon. The unexpected presence increases his caution. He knows he needs to be careful, as any false step could be fatal. The protagonist, still in shock and trying to process the situation, mutters to himself, "That was an accident. I never wanted to hurt that person. Everything would have been fine if he had stopped me too. It was self-defense." The researcher, noticing his anguish, approaches carefully. In a soft, mournful voice, she says, "I was foolish to play with you from the beginning. How could an ordinary person hurt an awakened body?" She pauses, watching the protagonist closely. "Do you remember, S21? Your body was extremely weak back then. According to the game's settings, you were a character with strong magical powers but very weak physical abilities." She continues, revealing a surprising truth. "It was I who transformed you from a very weak being into someone extremely powerful. But now, I think that was a mistake." With a quick movement, she takes a syringe from her pocket and sticks it into the protagonist's arm, injecting the contents with determination. He, scared and confused, apologizes and asks what she was doing. "What are you doing?" His voice is full of despair. The researcher, with a resolute expression, responds, "This is unexpected behavior for an NPC. Could it be a new quest?" He doesn't know what's happening, but he feels his strength fading quickly. "What did you do to me?" he asks, voice weakening. She responds in a calm, almost clinical tone. "It's a special tranquilizer. It looks simple, but it's dozens of times stronger than normal." As he struggles with a growing sense of weakness, the researcher explains, "I did it because it's very dangerous out there. The most dangerous person in this room is you." The truth of the situation begins to become clear to the protagonist. She sees him as such a threat that she has taken extreme measures to neutralize him. The protagonist, almost without strength, tries to understand the depth of the situation. Her words echo in his mind as darkness begins to take over his vision. He wonders about his real role in this world and how everything unfolded in such a dramatic and unexpected way. Uncertainty about his true identity and purpose weighs heavily on him as he loses consciousness, knowing that the fight for answers and understanding is far from over. The protagonist, feeling weakness taking over his body, asks the researcher, "Don't you trust me?" The researcher, with a determined look, responds, "It's not a question of wanting to trust. This is a situation where I can't trust you, even if I wanted to." He realizes the gravity of the situation and asks what he should do now. She responds candidly, "This would be resolved easily if you left here. However, if the situation is truly a glitch or error, we still need to discover the cause. No longer able to argue, the protagonist mumbles his apologies, trying to find a thread of understanding. I didn't want to hurt anyone, he says, his voice full of remorse. I know, she replies. I can see that. I was responsible for you, and I know your words are not lies. The researcher, still with the syringe in her hand, continues. But the problem is that, at this moment, you are dangerous. Not even you know, but you killed countless people and researchers without remembering. I am responsible for you, and I need to understand if you are suffering from amnesia as a side effect of the process, or if you are a great actor. The protagonist, confused and desperate, tries to understand the depth of the situation. I don't know what happened, he says, but there must be a way to resolve this. I'm not the villain you think I am. She looks at him with a mix of compassion and determination. That's hard to believe, she responds. You killed a lot of people, and even if you don't remember, the evidence is here. We need to find a way to solve this. The protagonist, feeling his consciousness fading, struggles to find words that can convince her. Please believe me, he begs. I want to help find the truth. I don't want to hurt anyone. The researcher, noticing the sincerity in his eyes, hesitates for a moment. Maybe there's a way, she says softly, but you need to prove to me that you can be trusted. We need to discover the truth together. With these words, the protagonist's determination strengthens, even as his vision becomes blurred and weakness takes over his body. He knows he needs to find a way to prove his innocence and solve the mystery that surrounds him. The researcher's trust may be his only hope for redemption and understanding what really happened. We go back a little in the past, to a simpler, more everyday time. There were several people using their cell phones, immersed in their own digital realities. The protagonist, among them, was walking calmly, and then he entered a store. Inside, other people were eating at the tables, enjoying their meals. He continued on his way when a blonde girl approached and shouted his name. Curious and somewhat surprised, the protagonist decides to approach with some caution. The people around start making fun of his name, and some even comment that the girl must be a foreigner, as her pronunciation wasn't good. Is she talking about traffic laws or something else? Someone asks. This is because the protagonist's name, in his native language, meant law. He turns to the girl and, with a sigh, says, I've told you several times not to call my name out loud. When he says this, it sounds more like an abusive word than a simple request. The girl, whose name is Monica, smiles. Even so, he admits that it is a good name and remembers that he, as a person who keeps promises firmly, should be more patient. Her pronunciation improved, but he couldn't help but suspect that she was purposely calling him that way. Whatever, he thinks. It was time to toast and celebrate everything they had achieved. Congratulations on finishing the development, he says, raising a glass. A toast to all. The protagonist, Monica, and the others present raise their glasses. He continues, the game's open beta was a great success. Everyone starts toasting and drinking, celebrating the great achievement. The CEO of Global Giant Fantasy Lost, Monica, raises her glass too. It's been 10 years since they met and started working together. He reflects on how intensely they lived their lives during this period. Monica, now in her 40s, looks at him with a smile. We have to finish the project, she says. Let's relax a little more by playing. What do you think about that? He asks, a little suspiciously, if she came up with this idea out of nowhere. Play? What do you mean by that? She responds enthusiastically, it's a single-player virtual reality RPG. It's coming out tomorrow. He smiles, understanding her excitement. A virtual reality RPG? That sounds amazing. They continued to celebrate, aware that they were about to embark on an exciting new phase of their lives. The mixture of anticipation for the launch and joy at the success achieved so far created an atmosphere of pure celebration. The protagonist, looking at Monica and everyone else, feels a wave of gratitude and determination. They had built something great together, and now they were ready to see the world experience the fruits of their labor. The protagonist, still a little confused, looks at Monica and asks, "What are you talking about? I'm a developer, but I'm still playing around with it a little. What fun would there be in all this?" He shakes his head, feeling a mix of skepticism and curiosity. "You're saying those pessimistic words again. Why don't you just try?" Monica sighs, with a determined but slightly exasperated look. "But it's true," she replies. "Taking a break now that the project is almost over seems strange. We need to stay focused. There is still a lot to do." The protagonist, reflecting on her words, feels the pressure of unfinished work. "I have no idea what this all entails," he says. "But if to do that you have to finish everything now, it's a bit complicated." Monica is quiet for a moment, and then, with a serious expression, says, "You promised we would see this through. That's why I always tell you, just do it." He feels a little pressured, but he also understands her passion for the project. "Okay," he says, trying to calm the situation. "I understand. I'll do what you're asking." She watches him for a moment before shaking her head. "Do you really understand? Because it sounds like you're not being sincere," she says, visibly shaken by the alcohol. Monica gets up and leaves the bar, staggering a little. The protagonist follows her, worried. When he reaches her, she turns and, with an impulsive gesture, hugs him. "Are you going to do this or not? Tell the truth," she demands, tears in her eyes. The sincerity in his voice and the vulnerability of the moment touch the protagonist. He hugs her back and, in a firm voice, responds, "Yes, I'm really going to do it. Let's finish what we started." She smiles, relieved, and together they walk out of the bar, ready to face the challenges that would come with the game's release. The protagonist's determination and Monica's passion for the project were the pillars that would support this new stage in their lives. Their renewed commitment meant they were ready for any obstacle that came their way. "So give up. That sounds good," says the protagonist, feeling temporary relief. "It was time to go for round 2, he adds, with a slight smile on his face. Monica laughs and, with a mischievous expression, says, "That sounds serious. I think I need to stop here." However, before he can react, she starts running, laughing loudly through the city streets. The protagonist, still laughing, goes right after her. They end up at a karaoke bar, where they decide to release their voices and sing together. The protagonist realizes that he hasn't taken care of his body for a long time, and as Monica said, maybe it would be good to relax a little. He and Monica, that tireless punk girl, have been working incessantly, and maybe it was time to take a break and recharge their batteries. Inside the karaoke, they sing, laugh, and have fun like they haven't done in a long time. Monica, with her free and energetic spirit, encourages the protagonist to let go and enjoy the moment. He realizes that these moments of relaxation are important to maintain balance and sanity, especially after long working hours. Later, as the night progresses, they sit exhausted but happy, remembering the songs and laughing at their own performances. "That was good," says the protagonist, looking at Monica. "We needed this." She smiles and agrees. "Yes, we needed to. But now, it's time to get back to work with a bang." We return to the present time, where the protagonist remembers Monica's words, "Play the game." He finally understands that she was the one who got him drunk and made him play the game, but the reason still puzzles him. Why? He wonders, trying to put the pieces of the puzzle together. Even though he doesn't fully understand, he knows he can't get stuck in questions. He needs to go out and find out what exactly Monica was trying to achieve. With renewed determination, he stands up and decides it's time to act. He needs to understand what is happening within the game and discover Monica's true objectives. If she put him in this situation, there must be a bigger reason behind all this. As he prepares to leave, he feels a mixture of curiosity and determination. He knows the journey ahead will be challenging, but he is ready to face any obstacle. After all, he has always kept his promises, and this time will be no different. With Monica's memory and her words of encouragement, He is ready to discover the truth and complete the mission entrusted to him. Then, he gives the command for the game to exit. The girl next to him starts to put her hand in front of the protagonist, asking what he was doing. He was trying to see things since his exit didn't work. He says it's nothing like that and that he needs to leave the game. He said to leave. Was it a glitch or something? Maybe he's going crazy. What exactly is this? He can't even get out, so it wasn't a common failure. Now, you say that, looking at its current state, you think it would be working properly. She was worried because it was an awakening, but she would be happy that it worked. He gets confused and she asks what's with that expression. He was surprised that it turned out like this, but he doesn't understand what he should really do. Something like this was no act, no lie, and he has no intention of hurting her. He said that wasn't the problem. How could she know that he won't hurt her unconsciously? That was a problem. He can't say he's not that guy. So, if you want to gain trust, you need to show it in his actions. And what should he do? I was telling him to obey orders until they leave that place, or he has to do this for her to trust him. This was crazy. He can't even log out and has to restrict behavior as demanded by a strange NPC. She asks what's wrong with his expression. Maybe he's refusing to do that kind of thing. He says no. If not for this, he could not follow anything. She said it was great. Looking at the condition it is in, you think it would be working properly. She was worried because she was awake, but now she's glad it worked. What's wrong with the surprised face since it came out like that? He doesn't understand why it took so much work. It's not like he was lying. He really doesn't want to hurt her and said that wasn't the problem. How do you know he wouldn't hurt her unconsciously? It would be pure. You cannot say that the Constitution included different people. So if you want to gain trust, there is at least. If you were serious, what do you mean by that? How does he exist? It would be saying to follow orders as long as you get out of there. I would have confidence in him. At this point, he would be going crazy. And what was that face? If it weren't for the injection, he would already be dead. In the middle of that room, she continues asking if he understands, because despite everything, how much she cared for him. Of course, he experimented on it, but he even knows how much he tried to minimize the pain. But it's not something you could brag about. An experience, come to think of it. Various memories of the character. There are things he vaguely remembers. He thinks the children in Class S will wake up amidst the experience. Would it be possible? What to do about this? There was no need to worry. If they wake up, they will be really strong. But is it worth shaving your beard? There is no such thing as a hunter in the laboratory. Well, don't worry about anything more or less than the results of our drugs. If a hunter came, they saw us doing this kind of experiment. Would they try to catch it before getting the results? It's actually about administering the drugs to the monsters, the people, and it's a big problem if the hunters find out. Honestly, when it first arrived, I would have been surprised by the whole situation. It was all for one cause, sacrificing a test subject for good. Better is research for the future. Better the opposite. They could be grateful because they're the ones waking those guys up. Of course, ordinary humans will be awakened thanks to them. But that scientist decides to call the other, asking to set up the experiment, as they would start immediately. She says that would be right, and was to make sure to wear protective clothing too. Furthermore, after wearing the protective suit, it was to check the test subject's vital signs. Okay, she says she knows, there was no need to worry. After they leave, she says it was disgusting, approaches the experiments and says they had a test of Mono's adaptability. Soon, make sure he would be ready at that time. You will secretly add a diluent, but this will draw a lot of attention to his body, and since he is experienced, he may be aroused. And if you have a success story, how could you provide a better environment for other people? She grabs a gun while putting on her protective clothing and continues on. If you think it's hypocrisy as a researcher to think like that, she also doesn't know how this happened and wanted to do something like a mentor. I wanted to say, you don't want any of them to die at that moment. Then, she approaches the body a little more, and she tells no one to die and be successful at that moment. Other people in protective clothing approach them and then tell the director that the mana aptitude test is in the highest class. The director asks if they caused any problems. He says no, that could never happen. He just had one question in mind. He also has a lot of questions. The day would end just answering his questions, but come on. I wasn't supposed to be harsh with the boy. It's just a researcher's curiosity. Anyway, you're going to do a mana adaptation experiment on that guy. Don't you think there's any problem in starting to experiment? A mutation transplant is because he has a big plan at that moment. That's what the director says. He continues saying that that guy will only receive a 10% diluted mana solution and will put the illusion spirit sap at 10%. Not even an expert in the highest class could withstand that percentage. Even the same heroic hunters in the army would die immediately if they drank it. The director then says that he doesn't think he knows all this. However, it is theoretically possible with the adaptability of the spiritual sap. The result is that it is a slop of spirits and resembles half the body and mana, which came from the Walmito concentration camp. And if there is some problem with a spiritual fluid that leads the body to disintegrate, either way, it seems to be divided whether it is a very good process or a failure, the director. So, he puts that kid's helmet on, saying if he likes fun, thinks about being successful no matter what, and at that moment, the protagonist comes back. The current one, he says that it was really hypocrisy to put a professor in the laboratory class. How can she do this? I had to endure these things to survive, and now why was I suddenly smiling? She wonders, there's no way he's trying to turn into a killer. He says no, he just remembered some old memories and remembers something like someone who wanted to be a teacher. And she asks how he knew that. He asks if she didn't know. She didn't say he was a hypocrite or something. He was very nervous at that moment. She asks if he was listening to that and wasn't sleeping well. He doesn't think he did anything wrong. It's not a bad thing to have someone in such a terrible place, right? She is embarrassed and soon disappears from the room. Turning to the protagonist, he apologizes, but why would she be embarrassed? Okay, I was supposed to let him out. It was a very moving sentence, but there's no need to be embarrassed. She asks him to be quiet, and if he can't just shut up. He asks if she was sulking for some reason, and she again tells him to be quiet, as expected. And there is something wrong. He wasn't like that. Could it be a side effect of awakening? She was getting more anxious. He apologizes, but for tasting her at that moment. So, we had to open it there, because it was dangerous inside. And it's not like you can just move now. The effects of the tranquilizers are gone. And you think that's another reason why you shouldn't open that door? The protagonist says that he should have waited a minute, as he is going to take a look at the situation. And she already said she was going, clumsily, but she's so cautious. In any case, for now, escaping safely was the priority. I hope the solution is resolved soon. At this point, a guard is held by the neck and simply lifted by another person. They have some test subjects who have poison in their blood. At that moment, the situation was not over yet, because it was becoming more dangerous. He says it wasn't time for the teacher to be like that. The situation is out of the ordinary. But she says she's even more scared of him. But please, calm down and think. He's still in his right mind, even after all this time. Wouldn't that be more important? It would still be difficult to go out on your own without him. She says that it seems much weirder when she tries to convince him that way because she doesn't want to take that moment too far. Maybe because she is the only human being in that institute, it would be a shame to leave her alone. She doesn't understand how he feels, even after doing a terrible experiment on him. He says it wasn't like she did it because she wanted that kind of thing. Even so, it was strange that he was trying to save himself this way. What if I have a different plan? He asks if it looks like that. She's so smart. That lab has a lot to do with the villain's settings. Since he can't get out, it would be better to control someone if possible. She asks if, in addition, she doesn't know about the other experiences, but there is no one I gave as much as he did. That's why he was in charge, because he became a little selfish and built a body according to her taste. He asks what would be happening. She says it's nothing. Would rather starve than die at the hands of a test subject. Come on, then, what should they do? If I gave a guarantee of continuing to live, I would be a little relieved. He says it doesn't matter, since it's a game. I was supposed to tell him. So, she throws a syringe and asks if she could give him an injection in his arm. He asks what he meant by that. It's like a tranquilizer, like the last one. I should say put restrictions between him. This was more painful than he imagined, and he puts the syringe in his arm without mercy or mercy. She says it's better to stop. It hurts a lot and is not a side effect. He asks if she was starting. She asks how much he applied, and he says he applied everything that was there. And yes, he says it was a very crazy day. He asked if he was going to take it. Who said to apply everything? Half of that was enough to kill someone. And he ended up applying it all at once because he was overreacting. As long as someone is wide awake, they will be fine with any medication. It was just a reaction accelerator, made just for him. The body will disintegrate much faster than the awakening effect I was thinking about at that moment. Well, he said he would believe him if he did that kind of thing. Did not say, and what did you mean by donkey? Who said to apply all this without thinking? She knows it's a potion in that lab that stops disintegration. But who cares if she dies from taking that kind of thing? Well, he can't leave someone who's going to die. The disintegration would have already begun in the protagonist, as he knelt down and began to feel dizzy. At that moment, his body was becoming much weaker, and she says it has already started. They would have to find the inhibitor, and he ends up receiving some notifications. He wonders what that kind of thing was. This message window was from his game. Then, the first tutorial mission arrived, mission number 1, called Survival. He wonders why it appeared suddenly. Furthermore, a mission without a veto. He doesn't remember doing it. Then, when he looks again, the window appears. Just yes, he couldn't deny it at that moment. And then an explosion happens behind him. It was a monster that was there. He ends up looking at the protagonist and says he should hurry up and do the treatment on his body. Soon after, we return, and the man says he hates that place and continues walking. The scientist says she has no choice. Everyone's equipment would be broken at that moment, and the protagonist was feeling tense. She says she told him not to move, because he was driving her crazy at that moment. I would need to find the inhibitor quickly, but I was being delayed by such a strange guy. It is fortunate that he is still in a good rational state. The man continues banging a glass, asking if he could quickly do the experiment on him, and she asks if he didn't listen, as he would also treat that guy. That guy would be critical too. I would be able to finish all of this in time. She wonders if the pipes are involved with that guy, and then he says that if he doesn't do it correctly, that man will die. And he knows very well that he was supposed to stop threatening him, and treating himself well would also help. Leaving, everything is fine, but you don't know if you could believe him too, and you think there's nothing you can do at that moment. The protagonist ends up accepting that mission. It was time to get on with it. First, he was a human test subject who was being secretly experimented on. The protagonist wonders if he would be explaining that character he is controlling, but continues during the experiment. The mysterious shock wave arrived and the guy woke up. The mystical world does not begin with admission to prison. What would be happening with that mission? That was also Monica's job. Perhaps, after that, the subjects with reinforced physical helmets escaped and began attacking researchers and soldiers, using the skills acquired during the experiment. After a fierce fight, all the people in the report died, and the subject also died due to the disintegration of his body, with side effects from the experiments. However, he is the only survivor. He was supposed to fight and get on with his life. The protagonist asks to stop this nonsense and just explain why he is there. The tip is that he can recover faster if he improves his physical strength. He can also increase it in many ways. This consumes points. How long are you going to keep saying these useless things? It opens the status window again, but what was that? The body and mana levels are low, aren't they? This is a consequence of disintegration. He has to hold out until he receives the inhibitor, and should just improve his physical abilities at that time. It debits 10 points, and the body has been updated. Then it got better. Everything was peaceful at that time, but he doesn't seem to be recovering. Then, he receives an inventory space increase reward. He has an inventory that he would use later, and the pain would be getting worse and worse. He thought things would get better. Was it just an illusion? The doctor asks if he was okay at that moment. He receives another notification window for the level 2 survival mission. She says she tried her best, but everything was getting worse and worse. Need to save it first. No matter what happened, the danger was far from over. With the side effect of the experience, the body would be disintegrating. The protagonist becomes more tense and asks to enter the laboratory and find the medicine to stop the disintegration. The doctor tries to wake the protagonist, saying that he cannot lose consciousness, and another tip appears to search the inventory for things that would be useful. She realizes that, so, the protagonist was alive. Hold on tight for a second. There was definitely the decay inhibitor somewhere around there. She starts looking but finds anesthetic, sashimi juice. Maybe there was another one there, a redefined liquid. It wasn't that either. What was that? Wait a minute, it wasn't an inhibitor. He wonders why he was on the floor. Anyway, he should hurry. At that moment, she asks him to drink it all while pouring it into his mouth. But what was he doing? He wasn't opening his mouth or drinking. Probably, when he opens it a little, then she starts playing. She says he's going to die. Because he took this job, it was just a joke. That persuaded her to go out with him at that moment, and she thinks she's going to let him die like that. She ends up drinking the inhibitor and passing it from mouth to mouth. Then he drinks it and starts coughing. After a while, that is, he was awake. At that moment, he opens his eyes and wonders what it was, because there was something sweet in his mouth. It's because there's syrup inside, and it improved the flavor with the research you ended up doing by mistake. He ends up looking, and she asks what he was looking at. He asks if she took it too and says that, just in case, the researchers also take it. He gets confused, and well, she saved him. No matter what, it wasn't supposed to look that way. He thanks her, but doesn't remember why he was in a coma. He sighs at that moment and says that, if it weren't for her, he probably would have disintegrated and died at that moment. So, he was saved because of her drinking habit. The researchers remain silent. The protagonist continues saying that, well, I think he'll see more time now. It's too early to say that, so I had to drink more. He is not an ungrateful person, so he will also remember this, and he was not supposed to make fun of her at that time. By the way, who did that mission? Level 2 of the mission was complete, and as a reward, you will receive 10,000 gold in a diamond package. That was a pretty accurate scenario. I'd be sure he's one of the production crew, but only drugs can stop the disintegration. If that is the case, it would be best to store as many of them as possible. But wait, they're going to face the troops. What could be worse? He should hurry since, moreover, the troops will arrive at the laboratory soon. So, it was about choosing a way to survive. She gets confused. And why is he pulling away from her again? The researcher wonders. Meanwhile, he says that very well, as it was time to put as many drugs as possible into the inventory they received earlier. He opens his inventory and starts organizing it. She wonders what he was doing. It's the ability to store things in that space. How could I explain this kind of thing? She asks if it is some effect of awakening, or is it some kind of magic? It's probably a type of magic, to begin with. He is an expert in this sort of thing, but she has never heard of such magic before. Well, his potential level is the highest possible, isn't it? There is nothing strange about him having a special ability. It was true. Could I remove it again? Obviously he can, if he does that kind of thing. Then, he reaches back into his inventory and pulls out the items he picked up. She says it was really cool. It was time to put everything they needed to try to survive. She will take everything away. The protagonist asks if she trusts him now, but she tells him not to misunderstand. I would be indebted to him for saving his life. Then I would have just asked you to pay the debt. He says it was true. He is a man who has to pay his own debt. It was time to go there. I wouldn't be being honest if I wasn't trusting him, and there wouldn't be much you could do if you really weren't trusting. I wouldn't have saved him in the first place. He asks to survive with her in that hell. But she says he's the patient. He shouldn't get sicker than he already was. Everywhere was in complete chaos, and the protagonist says it was cool, thanks to the inventory. I could be more comfortable than I imagined at that moment, but how long will it stay like this? It doesn't seem to fit everything, which was good. Well, he thanks you. He was just worried. He didn't even care about his own clothes. It was a relief that he was cooperating with her, but how could he leave? Furthermore, these tutorial missions kept appearing one after another. It's something that even he, a developer, doesn't know anything about. This realistic pain, if this is all a bug, then open beta makes no sense. Do you think it is correct to make a conjecture about all this? It was reality. But why was he distancing himself? Everything was supposed to be done too quickly. She starts bringing a lot of things. He asks why he brought so much. She is confused and looks at the man inside the glass. He says that was too much. That guy's disintegration has progressed a lot. There is no way to save it. Wouldn't it be better to finish comfortably? What would you be talking about? He's a test subject, like him. Even so, it was very dangerous. Not sure when it will get out of hand. She gets confused and says everything was fine. There should be some things ready to do this and perfect for moments like this. He's killed a lot so far. He doesn't want to kill anyone else. And I've already said that I would never let the people I'm responsible for die in the first place. Being brave is great, but there is no need to be foolish. It's hard to take care of everyone's lives right now. She says no, then holds up a paper, saying that after the procedure, the experiment continues with the manual samples out of control and the risk level 5 or higher. First, all researchers discard the body and experimental data, and then leave the destination location immediately to the designated place. They are without a doubt divided from the letter A to the letter B for support, escort, and product business. She asks what discard means and why it doesn't tell you how to save it. And you know very well that there is no way the facility has tried to save the test subjects. All of these subjects had great potential to the point that they could change that damn world. And what kind of expression would he make if he knew that he was the one who created that world? This was a game, and he asks for forgiveness. But the protagonist was only thinking about this kind of thing. She says that everything was done for this, otherwise, she thinks she would have entered this type of research institute, and if she thought about it very well, then she still has more reasons to survive and said she wanted to be a teacher, right? So why don't you go to a gym? That wasn't possible. She couldn't even protect the people there, and it's the lab's fault. She didn't do anything wrong. The protagonist holds her shoulder while saying this kind of thing. You should find a way to survive, and it will help. First, they're going to get out of there and save the world in a different way. He apologizes, but it's too late for a matter like this, and he thinks he's also a bit arrogant, right? Left. At that time, it will explode soon. She closes her eyes and speaks. That time to get out of there could be that too. You have to inform people about the true purpose of that laboratory, however you want. He ends up taking his inventory and puts the backpack on his back. Also, he says everything would be fine. They would be heading to the roof soon, but he thinks it's okay to look at the conditions nearby first. He usually needs to secure a way out. Opening the door, the protagonist feels an immense tremor, and they ask what that was and who knows. No way, is there any survivor other than him? If not, whoever is a security guard and investigator, guinea pig, whoever, is the protagonist's enemy. There are no allies at that moment. What should they do? They must fight. His eyes start to shine, and soon he thinks that no, They are not fighting at that moment. Or what you have to do, it was something else. He feels something behind him, a kind of himself. Soon after, he opens the door without mercy, and there in front, there was a person with long hair and a rope around his neck. There was a letter saying, "Mom, I'm sorry. I can't go back. My head hurts, my body hurts, but I love you so much. Please take good care of everything." The protagonist is silent, and in front of him, he feels that emotion, that sensory perception too. It's not just a game, and it's not one, really. The sky glows pink, and the protagonist says he doesn't see any suspicious activity anywhere he looks. Okay, I could relax a little right now. The problem is being in the laboratory, and I would have to be more relaxed if I hadn't lost my physical capacity because of someone. She says it happened because she was scared and did it before she could stop him. It wasn't anyway. He needs to decide what he's going to do from now on. It was to take a closer look at the mission that appeared previously, a new tutorial mission, the Survival 3 mission. He managed to avoid the disintegration of his body, but there is a limit to drugs. Even that much medicine is not enough. Whatever he injected at that time. Moreover, the troops will arrive at the laboratory soon. It was to choose a way to survive. A path appears in front of the protagonist, and he begins to look over it. The first choice was to hide in the laboratory and wait for the investigation to be completed. It is a very dangerous method due to the high risk of being caught. The second choice is to enter the safety zone. However, there is a risk of being caught by the pursuer. Third choice, leave the safe zone and go to the fog zone. That choice comes with threats, monsters. That was the gist of the tutorial. The protagonist says that this was very kind of them. However, a warning. There is a time limit. You have to hurry, choose, and also try to use the store. He asks to stop with this type of screen and starts to shock the punch. She asked why he keeps doing these things out of nowhere, if there is something wrong with his brain. But when she looks back worried about what was happening, she sees a giant, saying that it hurts a lot. She is shocked, and the protagonist comes forward, saying that this guy has already opened his eyes. She apologizes because she didn't abandon him on purpose. It was useless. That man's head starts to crack, no matter what. Then, he looks at the protagonist and moves forward with everything. He ends up pushing the doctor, saying that it was very dangerous there. So, he grabs that giant's arm and decides to try and kick him in the face. He even succeeds, trying to immobilize him, throwing his arm down and finishing with a knee. But it was as if nothing had been done to that guy. The knee stops in the middle of the face. The man looks at the protagonist, who was scared. Then, the protagonist decides to spin over his head and try to throw him down with everything. But it was useless because, at that moment, the giant grabs the protagonist and throws him with everything to the ground. He starts with the super blood, because that punch was too heavy. And at that moment he says that he forgot that his skills were reduced. So, there was no way out. If he died, he would go automatically. Maybe that would be better. However, the doctor asks him to wake up, and the protagonist says that ending up like this will be very uncomfortable. We go back a little in time to where he received a pack of diamonds as a reward for the tutorial mission. It's not just any item, it's the special item. He apologizes, but he had to use a skill. He opens the store, and 4 tabs appear for him. Summon weapon, summon armor, summon the healer, and summon a hero. He doesn't know why he got paid for the first time in a game, but this is his last chance. He presses on the armor invocation, and soon after, lightning falls from the sky, opening all the clouds. Soon, he looks up at the sky, seeing how incredible the effect is. Additionally, it has a rainbow healing effect. He feels a glow around him, but what stands higher than all that is 10 stars. He then holds a staff, and armor begins to create around him. The giant also looks at the protagonist, who was completely armored at that moment. So, it was time to start round 2. The giant quickly becomes irritated by that. He tries to punch the protagonist with everything he has, which ends up having no effect. The giant, confused by that moment, asks if the mosquito bit him. That was an iron wall armor, a 4-star class item that adds a whole lot of distributed power to defenses. It has a defense comparable to a 5-star class item. Soon after, a staff is attacked in the Titan's face, which throws him back with everything, and the protagonist prepares for another attack. Iron Wall is a 4-star armor, so it's a bit disappointing, but Neohogger is a 10-star item. Like this item, he can deal with that guy easily, a weapon that has a similar appearance to Neohogger. Of killing monsters, not so much significantly less powerful than the normal dragon. It is displayed as a star class, but its actual performance is a 6-star class. He asks about having a skin, and then he keeps an eye out, but wait, that was fake. The doctor asks if the protagonist is okay and what's with those clothes. Is it an ability he gained or awakening it? It's probably the awakening power. He asks if it isn't amazing and why his answer seems dubious. Before he could respond, the giant ended up returning, but he still thinks they weren't finished. She gets worried and asks him to be careful, but he tells her not to worry. That ended very well. It was time to test his strongest ability to summon a hero, which is an ability that only players can use. He doesn't know why this guy has this option, but it was a good opportunity to test him no matter what. An invocatory circle begins to appear. Then he says that it can't be that. That blue light was Beatrice, a 10-star hero. The attack has slightly lower defenses than other 10-star heroes, but it has characteristics of an SSS class Witch's Workshop. It is a trait that evolves and creates alchemy. Serious construction and sub-features being in the Witch's Workshop provides not only various reinforcement effects, but also a dramatic correction in the production of items that contain magical elements. They were a cat that had just been born, so it was a hero from the start. Sir, it was 10 stars, so the development team must have been trying so hard. At that moment, the giant wakes up again and damn it, it wasn't time to talk. He thinks he's grown a lot more than before, so he asks Beatrice to get rid of him. The cat then stretches out and asks if she's going to force it right after summoning. She apologizes, but she passes. She was summoned now and the condition is not good. He asks what would be happening. The giant attacks the protagonist, but he just dodges, and she says it wasn't time to play now, he should help Beatrice. He says he wasn't joking. Not for now, as he jumps over the giant. If the master he summoned has weakened, it's natural that this will also affect him. He asks what that rule was and what was happening. He's stronger than before, and it's not over yet. The protagonist then asks if it was too difficult for her to fight now, so it was to create a Witch's Workshop. The Witch's Workshop is a feature of that class. Using this, he could get rid of the disintegration body, so at least he doesn't have to struggle with the risks. But she says that this was also too much, and she didn't say the abilities are limited because the master is very weak and serious, and what should he do so since he hasn't said it every time? It's not impossible if they fulfill the characters in the first place. Amanda, the master's rating should be ranked as the fight would also require a mana stone. If there is no mana stone, the master's rating should be at most. It's a lot of other things, but maybe it's too much for her. It's all that kind of thing. So when the giant gets stuck in the stone and would throw it at the protagonist, he asks if he would be playing with her in that situation. Thinking about it all was very strange today. Don't lie, Beatrice was a human-type heroine character with a human form, but strangely was summoned as a cat. So he asks to protect the scientist. Although she is the game's NPC, he couldn't let her die. She asks what it was about PC and says she couldn't believe he was still thinking that way. The Titan. Then, it starts releasing laser beams from its mouth. And even the protagonist, who defends himself, even manages to dodge. He says he doesn't know if he can do it all. The scientist worries and the cat says there is nothing they can do at that moment. With that guy increasingly furious, the protagonist tries to get away a little better, but ends up failing. The attack is aimed at him. He ends up defending, but he feels immense pain, immense tension too. Damn, it was hard to bear. The struggle for power, even, has to endure that guy's body disintegrating. The scientist quickly asks the cat if she could use magic. It can't, because it simply can't help you. She says yes, she can do this, but now the power has weakened. I would be waiting for an opportunity. The scientist asks what happens if the protagonist dies before this opportunity arrives. But she says she would be very desperate. She probably doesn't like him. She is embarrassed and asks what the cat was talking about at that moment. And no way, she is a researcher and he is a subject. But she ends up remembering the moment she kissed him to pass the liquid and becomes even more embarrassed and says that they are just partners until they leave that place. But a laser passes by her and sees that the protagonist was thrown with everything behind. But she gets angry, saying no, if she keeps fighting, his body wouldn't be able to resist. Inhibitors cannot prevent all types of disintegration, but there is more than one way to save the master, and he asks if there is anything he could do, and the cat asks if she would be willing to put her life on the line. She gets confused, and that was too much. Now, the hands and feet are responding in a different way, practically as if they were not responding, but the protagonist and he asks himself if there is another way. Then, the cat screams for the protagonist and he asks what she is doing. She apologizes in advance and throws a power at him, asking what that was. The scientist was right behind the Titan, trying to hit him with everything, and she says she's sure he'll try to stop the moment he realizes. So, it will stop her master for now to use the magic and have to deal a blow to the monster, which accelerates the disintegration. She jumps with the same syringe she had used on the protagonist to slow down his disintegration and says that the moment the blow is released, he has to accelerate everything. He is reducing the chances of interruption using the cognitive impairment magic. If he notices, it will end. And he asks if he can still do that. So, she says that she has no choice but to do it from now on. She won't let anyone enter that laboratory and she won't let anyone die, no matter what. Then, she uses the syringe on the monster. This ends up making his disintegration slower, or at least doesn't seem to work properly. He holds the scientist with just one hand, and the protagonist becomes intense at that moment. The scientist apologizes while smiling. And with that, she is thrown to the ground. The protagonist quickly goes into crisis, and the cat gets on top of him, saying it was just time to leave, then tries to teleport light to another place. The scientist is then thrown to the ground, and the giant begins to take over as well. Soon after that, the protagonist begins to hang the cat, asking why he was doing this and why he asked her, a scientist, to do this. And at that moment, the cat asks if he thinks the scientist was really an NPC or if he knew. He didn't know that this was a game, right? Then, he knocks the cat to the ground with everything. What does it mean if it's not a game? What would you be talking about? She asks if it's not ugly to ask this kind of thing, even though she knows that the masters have already vaguely felt it. He enters the body of a villain instead of a player, and he can't get out of that game either. Would you be feeling reality? Could this really be a game? Maybe this whole thing wasn't a game. He says it can't be true. If true, the scientist died. The protagonist, before finishing his speech, felt extreme feelings in each other, so he began to vomit on the floor. And then, the cat starts to use a power on the protagonist. He asks what she was doing. It was a magic that stabilizes the mind and makes you feel better. If she sacrificed herself on purpose, the cat says she gave her a choice, but she chose it. They didn't say it like that. It would be cowardice. She definitely wanted people to sacrifice themselves and wanted to bring the master, the meaning that they were denying, which was reality, and trying to live in a world completely made of games. And if so, that was a very extreme choice, but he wouldn't blame the cat for that. He remembers the scientist and thinks that she must have risked her life alone for her mistakes, and if he ends up blaming her for her death, it would be in vain. The cat expressed her gratitude but made no attempt to apologize. He still harbored considerable distrust towards her. Despite this, what needed to be done was already complete. Now, he found himself faced with a dilemma. He needed to reflect deeply on the next steps he would take in the future. The situation unfolded exactly as he had predicted. It was imperative to find a solution to return to the real world. However, in the midst of this urgent thought, an unexpected screen appeared before him, causing the protagonist a significant fright. The message on the screen was clear and direct: Vilma, Ultimate Survival Mission. He had completely forgotten that this warning would appear every time he left the safe zone and entered the waves of fog that permeated that environment. The screen, lit with a cold, bluish light, seemed to almost mock his desperate situation, reminding him of the constant threat he faced. Panic began to set in as he tried to reorient himself and understand the new mission he needed to complete to ensure his survival. He knew that, in addition to the constant struggle against unforeseen challenges, he now needed to deal with this new layer of complexity imposed by the mission. What came next was uncertain, and fear of the unknown began to dominate his thoughts as he prepared to face impending adversity. Humanity's enemies lurk in every fog zone. It was to survive, to become strong, to return to the safe zone of the capital of South Korea. The protagonist asks if he wants to go there again. Come to think of it, this was real. So what is the search for? That was the end of the tutorial. Can't find it for a while. For this reason, it was to tell an important fact in that world, called the mystical world, which would be on the verge of destruction, just like the game, which has the same name as he knows. And this world is not just a virtual world within a game, but it is the real world that exists in another dimension. So, it was real. This was no longer a game, but reality. Don't consider life insignificant. Bringing him into that world at that moment recommends that he not make stupid judgments. There was a signature with the letter M, but he didn't know who it was. At that moment, the protagonist asks about not finding his life insignificant. If he's playing with him in that place that kills people like insects, not considering life insignificant was ridiculous. It wasn't to make him laugh at that moment. Do you know how many people died in front of him? It was too late. Why did you do this to him? What does she want? Meanwhile, at a research center, several people were dying. However, in one of them, a truck starts to drive over all those dead bodies. An army arrives soon. At that moment, everyone was supposed to be alert. Then, the truck passes over the people, and the protagonist says that it really was the mystical world, another dimension from which the game was modeled. What was Monica planning to do? What does she want from the protagonist in this ridiculous world? What could he do alone? He keeps taking deep breaths. So the cat uses her power again, asking if he could calm down. Understand that it is difficult to accept and that you don't trust the cat very much. But you want to keep this in mind. You are the only one who could save that world. He was the master. He doesn't know what he could do. Well, he shouldn't be doing this, and he knows he'll survive no matter what. Heaven passes. So, they are arriving again at where the protagonist was being kept. The first platoon and the second squad will choose the interior. The third and fourth squad members will search outside. In this, they are already prepared with weapons, armor, war axes, among other things. So, they start to enter that place. They go through a few doors, and, at the second or third, they start to stop and send the squads inside. When you enter, they give a warning that there is no problem. Everything was clean at that moment. Then, they tell the platoon commander that there seem to be no survivors in that place. He tells the first and second squads to let their guard down and look for clues. The third and fourth squads stand by, taking care of the surroundings. Was right. Then, one of the soldiers arrives and says that it seems like an accident has occurred, a chain of experiments. But the remaining robes suggest that all test subjects possess some special powers. This means that perhaps they were awake as a group. The magic crystal ball for surveillance verified this. Yes, surveillance records also show no signs of external intrusion until it disappears. So, it was an escape that happened for internal reasons. Would this be impossible unless they were awakened? This means that the test subjects woke up as a group. If someone published a report, they would be reprimanded for writing a fictional novel. If this was not recorded, it could have been an external operation. He is not sure of this. However, upon inspecting the internal medical communication network, it can be concluded that the subjects woke up in a group and escaped. So is this true? If that is the case, then it would be saying that the awakening of a group was not a joke either. There was a magical communication crystal connected to the military base. Judging by the body of the researchers in front of them, it appears that they were attacked before they even made contact. The world would be going crazy. He couldn't believe that the test subjects are awakening in a group and being left aside like normal people. If the entire inspection is in vain, then it would have been good for them to wake up, don't you think? He tries to kick the body of a person who was a guinea pig, but when he sees it, he realizes that her face is completely melted, and this ends up scaring him. He woke up, but as you can see, he couldn't avoid the side effects, so he'll know when he sees this kind of thing. It was time to leave everything as it is, no matter what. So, they call the commander, saying there is a problem. He wonders what happened and says that, among the survivors, he thinks someone ended up escaping. He asks about the non-survivor, and, if true, if there are any traces. Yes, many drugs, including spoilage inhibitors and others, have disappeared. It's been 7 hours since they lost contact. If they wake up one after the other, he would have left a long time ago. You should contact the checkpoint. There are so many checkpoints. What to do other than that? Was there anything else missing? The safe containing the USB also disappeared. Wait, the safe is gone. He would be going crazy at that moment. There was no way that safe was too heavy. He's even carrying a lot of food and medicine. How the hell was that possible? This situation is bigger than I imagined. Squadrons 2, 3, and 4 were to stay alert. He goes with the first platoon, where they could establish a line of communication. They would have to contact the Institute by any means, no matter what. It is at this moment that the soldier starts saying that they should send reports about this incident to the battalion commander. And he was right. At that moment, he holds a crystal ball and asks what the point of a magical communication tool was. He looks ahead and says he can't even communicate over long distances because of that infernal fog. Then, he begins to hear an intense noise on the other side, an immense noise that can be heard even in the city. The protagonist says that it looks like he is going crazy. Why was the road so complicated? Time is already up. Should they take a break? He looks at his watch and talks about it. The cat jumps out of his head, and so he decides to look at the horizon while opening a map. The river was not that far away, and there is also a reservoir nearby. Since he had been walking all this time, he asked the cat if he could trust her. She asks if he will want to trust a little cat. What do you mean by a small cat? Is he a 10-star hero, or doesn't he know what he's talking about? She jumps between the protagonist's legs and says she doesn't think he knows. Isaiah is curious. What should he do at that moment? The protagonist says he could guess, but it would be better if he told the truth himself. Who could trust her? She says it's okay. Destruction would be approaching that world, and the master is the only one who could save it. They simply put him as the savior. True, and do you know what madness is? Saying you're going to save the world. Well, she says she knows that. As for the task the scientist gave, he knows she would be serious. But how could I save the world? Wait, she's not telling him to decide right away. In any case, you would be helping a lot if you didn't worry about it. See, she ends up using a power of her own. The protagonist wonders what was going on. When asked about Beatrice, she turns into a mutant sunfish monster with a 4th degree of risk. This is equivalent to a low-ranking skill level of 3. Low-level hunters can hunt easily. He asks if it's serious. Do you know that it was crazy to say that you were doing that kind of thing? He asks again about the cat. When he looks back, he says to wait a little. In fact, a fish had appeared, and the cat was fighting it easily, throwing it away very high, and once again she does it. She gives another kick that destroys the fish, with everything on the ground. The protagonist asks if she could fight. That place is called the Fog Zone, a place where monsters are crowded everywhere. He had better be cautious from now on. He can actually sense this kind of thing even while wearing internal armor. If they bumped into someone that big, it was really terrible just thinking about that kind of thing. But she knows she doesn't want that. She was the one who got in there first, and she could do something. If he gave a bottle of medicine, he didn't want him to know how the master would feel. But she didn't want to. She understands how the protagonist feels and wanted him to know that she came here sincerely to ask for his help. He couldn't easily trust her, but he would be grateful if he saved her. Let's find a safe place first. There are other problems that the master needs to solve as well. She asks what is the attitude of change. Either way, it was true. There were other things the protagonist had to worry about. If you want to say that the problem was a characteristic of the integration body, it is not. That's exactly what you have to do. Get his body back to normal first. So it was time to do it their way. They met a sunfish and some lobsters. Beatrice solved everything with one punch of her own, and she has the meat from the lobster's front leg at that moment. So they go to a forest, the city of Gwangmyeong. It would be closer than the other one. He asks Beatrice what she thinks. She ends up not responding and says she thinks it's better to do it from there. So she uses 3 literal powers, and in that she starts making a potion. The witch's pot is installed there. He probably knows the effects. It's to help hide the monsters, right? Furthermore, it was useful in crafting various additional effects such as mental stability. It was a smaller compatibility than the witch's workshop, but in the meantime, it would be quite useful. It's okay, as long as he can eliminate the body's disintegration characteristic. There was a tent where I could rest first. Why would she be so versatile at that moment? She's like that. The smell was very good, and he asks Beatrice what she is doing. She was just making dinner, and it was already evening at that time. The protagonist then asks if he could use the witch's pot to do these things too. He decides to eat. It was actually better than he expected after eating the lobster leg. But he keeps thinking it through. Question turned into a cat because he's weak, obviously. The proposal is because I would be asking that to begin with they are already limited to the restriction in that world, only to the master's ability. He could lift those restrictions. In other words, as he tries to save the world, you will have no choice but to side with him. Well, they can't be helped even if they are 10-star heroes. If that is the weak master, it is difficult to bring out the strength of a legendary hunter. In the end, he has no choice but to be strong. But why do you keep saying, we? She doesn't respond and starts to sleep. The protagonist gets angry, but he asks to let it go. It was supposed to remove that disintegration effect first, and you know how to do that kind of thing. She says yes because she still asks. She's one of the highest ranked in alchemy, you know, and that's it. He himself knows that he doesn't have enough budget to detail the ingredients, and that was true. But we know that he would have enough budget for those ingredients too. And he thinks it would be better if they could make an item and rank it lower, since it is very strong. And if so, could you tell me what would be missing? Something with a secret recipe or something? She says that if the master knows the whole world and doesn't know a recipe, how could he know about it? He sighs so he can't help it. Then she goes to the protagonist and starts using his inventory, taking each item and throwing everything into a potion. She says it was time to start, and the process seemed extremely realistic, very different from what he initially imagined. At every step, she asked him if he really thought it would be easy to create such a complex and powerful elixir. But this isn't magic, it's alchemy, she explained, underlining the difference. To her, it didn't matter. The important thing was that everything was going well. The protagonist, however, ended up falling asleep during the process. When he woke up, the first thing he asked himself was what had happened to Beatrice. Did she stay up all night? He was worried, thinking that if she didn't sleep, who would prepare the elixir the next day? He remembered the jokes about working overtime at the company, comparing the situation to the hard work they were doing there. It was enough to realize that they needed a break before starting the day's training. Today, he could go out hunting monsters and earn points, but he knew it would be better to save them as much as possible. According to the game's setup, People around the world could not obtain points even if they awakened their abilities. So the point system had an especially significant effect on players like him. The fact was that Beatrice knew this too, which was a bit strange. At the very least, the way she acted indicated that perhaps she was outside the game's setting. Anyway, it was time to start training. A new growth mission would be available, and he wondered whether it would be through the Academy's training method or the Magus Tower's training method. He wondered again about how to become strong. For those who decided to train seriously, there are many training methods in the world, but the best method was, without a doubt, having a solid foundation. The demanding conditions included 300 push-ups, 300 sit-ups, 300 squats, and running 30 kilometers. The additional positive growth compensation varied depending on the number of repetitions he would do. This actually seemed like a normal workout, but he wondered if it was Monica who created this regimen. Well, now wasn't the time to be thinking about that kind of thing. The answer was obvious. He remembered hearing about that exercise routine from Monica earlier. The number of replays had increased drastically, as had the missions that offered additional bonuses. These missions were rare and valued by everyone. So why doesn't he just try? He knows that no matter what, he's going to end up doing it anyway. With this determination in mind, he removes his armor, preparing for the physical challenge that awaits him. He starts doing his push-ups, performing a little over 100. However, it was still extremely difficult. If strength truly ranks physical ability, he needs to do 200 more push-ups to reach his goal. Beatrice, observing his effort, asks if he is already thinking about giving up, even though he is only halfway through training. He, with an expression of determination, replies that she can say whatever she wants. He knows that if he completes the mission, he will earn a valuable point. With this point, he will be able to strengthen his body as much as he wants, and this is a huge motivation for him. Deciding to continue, he takes another look at the training conditions. He wonders what that was because he realizes that he needs to do everything without even taking a break. This is challenging because if he stops, everything starts over again, and he would have to start from scratch. He wonders what he was talking about at that moment. If they cut the training in half and started again after the reset, he would have to do it millions of times. At that moment, he understands the true nature of training. It was not just a physical exercise, but a test of perseverance and determination. Understanding this, he mentally prepares himself to face the challenge. He knows that to become truly strong, he needs to overcome these obstacles without hesitation. With this new perception, he dedicates himself completely to training, determined to complete each repetition and earn the point he so desires. So, he has to do this no matter what. There are many recovery positions he can adopt, so he just needs to relax and work really hard. But wait, he wonders if his chest shouldn't grow a little bigger. He remembers that he was supposed to bend his arms at right angles, perfect angles, but he is confused and asks her to stop with these instructions. Even if he faints, he is determined to finish everything. Will he lose the bonus if he doesn't complete it? Well, he's determined to see it through to the end, no matter what. The protagonist then tries to pick up a spoon, but ends up falling awkwardly. He comments, half to himself, that it was a very good spoon, but what he's really saying is that he can't even eat dinner easily. Beatrice, intrigued, asks what he was doing late at night. He seems to be fine, but in reality, he is not at all fine at that moment. She looks at him and sees that his entire body is a mess from that horrible mission. She then asks if she could help in any way. Maybe it would be useful to take a look at what he was trying to do. She realizes that, despite all his determination and effort, he is at the limit of his strength. Training, with all its demanding and repetitive conditions, is taking a toll on him. Even so, he remains determined, believing that, in the end, it will all be worth it. She approaches, offering support, knowing he needs a break, even if he doesn't admit it. He, with a tired smile, accepts the help, recognizing that, sometimes, even the most determined people need a helping hand. Thus, together, they face another stage of the challenge, knowing that, With mutual support, they will be able to overcome any obstacle that training or the game imposes on them. Then, suddenly, he falls to the ground with a surprised impact and wonders what is happening. What he was doing was to prepare himself, otherwise his back might break. Beatrice, noticing his confusion, asks him to stay calm and let it go. He asks what she would be doing and why she would be behind his back. She replies that it doesn't matter, she's just a cat. And yes, she's a cat, to be honest, but with one caveat: her paws are very heavy. She asks about what he would have said about her paws, with a very scary look. The protagonist is visibly scared and quickly says that it was nothing, nothing at all. He realizes he's saying useless things now and tries to compose himself. Beatrice then declares that she will be using healing magic to help his recovery. It was magic. So that would certainly make a difference. He feels that his body is much better than before, as if he is renewed. "Are you feeling okay now?" Beatrice asks, with a tone of concern mixed with pride. He says yes, feeling surprisingly good. It was as expected of her. She is really worth being a 10-star hero. Beatrice then reminds him to hurry up and complete the mission no matter what. The protagonist, still impressed by the effectiveness of her healing magic, stands up with renewed determination. With strength restored and new vigor, he prepares to continue training. He knows that, with Beatrice's support, he can overcome any challenge. They have a mission to complete, and, despite the difficulties and obstacles, they are ready to face whatever comes their way. The protagonist, with a confident smile, looks at Beatrice and thanks her for her help, ready to move forward and achieve his goals. Then, the protagonist approaches to do sit-ups. Night comes, and he realizes that his remaining points are only one. He can't do much with just 1 point, and he wonders what it could mean to have just that 1 point. Physical abilities have not improved as much as he had hoped. He comments that it's true. He couldn't want his physical abilities to increase drastically in such a short time. The growth rate, although slow, was not abnormal. The body he was in had excellent abilities, not only in terms of mana but also in physical qualities. He notes how Beatrice's medicine could make him stronger with unprecedented speed. She starts shaking her paws in the middle of the goo, mixing ingredients until she makes a medicine. She then asks him to eat this and sleep well. Thanking him, she ends by saying that she will definitely serve him very well. "Now please eat this and go to bed. I will finish the preparations for the elixir and finalize the ingredients first." He thanks her while eating the medicine, but makes a very ugly face due to the unpleasant taste. She, realizing, asks why he doesn't care about the taste first. He, forcing a smile, says that the effectiveness of the medicine is more important than the taste. The next morning he wakes up and asks what time it is. He thinks he slept soundly as soon as he took the medicine. Beatrice, seeing him awake, asks how he is feeling at that moment and if there is anything out of the ordinary. He responds that his body was overworked yesterday, but now he feels much better. With an expression of relief, he realizes that the medicine has really taken effect. He stands up, feeling refreshed and ready to continue with his training. Beatrice, satisfied with the result, reminds him that there is still a lot to do, but that he is on the right path to achieving his goals. They share a moment of mutual understanding, ready to face the challenges ahead with renewed determination and strength. Then it would be okay, he thinks. He comments that he doesn't feel any pain and that this must be due to the medicine. That was obvious, because she did it, he reflects, amazed at the effectiveness of the treatment. How could something be so effective in just 1 night? It was almost unbelievable, but the results were there. He realizes that there could be more effects from the elixirs and wonders what else he could expect from them. Beatrice, noticing the protagonist's perplexity, explains that the elixirs are the results of advanced alchemy, which he considers to be an almost miraculous effect. "What do you mean just them?" he asks, trying to understand better. "Is this some electronic-grade medicine effect?" he conjectures, still trying to take it all in. He notes that his physical abilities haven't increased from magic alone. All of his stats increased by points as well. This must probably be a problem with the game, he thinks. Beatrice, noticing his confusion, pats the protagonist on the shoulder and says, "Didn't you hear when I said I'm a very high-level alchemist? If you stay with me, we'll save the world. That's a piece of cake." She smiles, confident in her abilities. He understands that she knows exactly what she is doing and feels more at ease with that. As she walks away from the protagonist a little, he says that today he will train, no matter what. Beatrice, with an air of approval, responds, "That's great, but remember, it's important to take care of yourself. If you're tired, I can give you a massage." He smiles, appreciating Beatrice's offer. She walks away to continue her preparations, and he mentally prepares himself for another day of intense training. With his body recovered and his abilities improved by the elixirs, he feels more prepared than ever to face the challenges that lie ahead. The determination in his eyes reveals that he is ready to continue his journey, knowing that he has a powerful ally by his side. So he decides there's nothing to worry about. They will bask in the knowledge that he needs a source of extraordinary strength to be able to save the world or do anything great. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the world, we see Captain Yu Seung-jin, commander of the 2nd Company of the Blue Wolf Unit. He addresses his men with authority. It's time to go all out. He explains that a hunter, a test subject, escaped safely, and this cannot be tolerated. "We need to act fast," he continues. One of the soldiers tries to justify. "Sorry, sir, but I checked it myself." Before he could finish, the captain's cigarette falls to the floor, interrupting his excuse. The commander, with a stern look, reminds everyone, "If you think you can't take him alive, just shoot him on the spot." "But, Captain," one of the soldiers tries to argue, but is quickly cut off. "It's nothing to worry about. We're not doing this for the first time," the captain counters, assuring everyone that the mission must be taken seriously. With their determination strengthened, everyone begins to prepare for the operation. "How many drugs did he take with him?" someone asks. "A total of a month's worth," replies the soldier in charge of supplies. "So, he'll come back a month later to finish it off," he adds, with everyone aware of the gravity of the situation. "He has a lot of dilution kits, right?" "Yes." Furthermore, after checking the neighborhood, we discovered that there is an eternal village nearby, an outer village, informs another soldier. The captain wonders about this village, and yes, since it's not big, we ended up confirming the location. He smiles darkly. "Very well, it's been a while since I've had an interesting mission." Meanwhile, the protagonist and Beatrice continue with their preparations. He feels like he needs to become stronger quickly. Beatrice encourages him. "Come on, you can do it. Warming up is essential." He knows that every workout, every exercise, takes him one step closer to his goal of saving the world. The determination in the protagonist's eyes is evident. He is ready to face any challenge. The mission of Captain Yu Seung-jin and his Blue Wolf unit is about to intertwine with the protagonist's journey, creating a scenario of tension and action. Both sides are determined to achieve their goals, and confrontation seems inevitable. The protagonist's ability to improve his physical and magical capabilities will be tested to the maximum, as will Beatrice's ability to create powerful elixirs. With this new understanding of the gravity of the situation, everyone is preparing for what is to come. The protagonist, now stronger and more determined, teams up with Beatrice to face any adversity. The Blue Wolf unit, led by the ruthless Captain Yu Seung-jin, moves with precision and strength, ready to eliminate any threat. The protagonist was at the peak of his training, exhaustively completing his 600 push-ups. The daily quest was there, and upon completing the last move, he finally got his reward. His physical abilities increased significantly, and the negative trait of body disintegration was removed. Feeling a wave of relief and accomplishment, he thinks, "Finally, I'm done with this mess." With this achievement, he realizes that he has leveled up. Even the cat, his faithful companion, starts to celebrate along with him. "Now what?" he asks himself. knowing it's time to say goodbye to an important part of his journey. Even after overcoming body disintegration, he understands that now, with his mana level reaching 70, he could learn advanced mana techniques. It was essential for him to master these techniques to continue progressing. It's good to learn how to do it, but what am I going to do with all this? He muses, realizing that he needs to master the infinite mana method to maximize his strength. Yes, now he must overcome all weaknesses and focus on his own strengths. Determined, he apologizes to Beatrice, requesting, "Could you leave me alone for 2 minutes?" She responds with a knowing smile, "Yes, I'll leave you alone for 2 minutes." She steps back and uses noise-blocking magic to ensure he has the silence he needs to concentrate. The protagonist, now alone and silent, sits quietly in a corner, closing his eyes to concentrate. Little by little, a magical circle begins to appear around him, with intricate lines surrounding his body. Originally, such concentration of mana and control over the magic circle would be extremely difficult, but with his enhanced body and newly acquired abilities, he finds it surprisingly easy to accomplish this kind of thing. Energy flows through his body as he concentrates, feeling each pulse of mana within him. The lines of the magic circle shine brightly, reflecting his determination and focus. He is ready to master the infinite mana method, a skill that will take him to a new level of power. With noise-blocking magic ensuring a peaceful environment, he feels a deep connection to the flow of mana around him. His breathing becomes slower and more controlled, each inhalation and exhalation synchronizing with the pulse of magical energy. He remembers Beatrice's words, her confidence in her abilities, and the importance of this technique for the success of his mission. As he continues to meditate and channel his mana, he feels an internal transformation. Every cell in his body seems to vibrate with pure energy, and he understands that he is on the right path. Beatrice's hard training, perseverance, and guidance are starting to pay off. He is ready to face any challenge that comes his way, armed with his new strength and skills. 2 minutes pass, and Beatrice returns. "How do you feel?" she asks, with a look of curiosity and expectation. He opens his eyes, which now shine with a new intensity. "Better than ever," he replies, with a confident smile. "I'm ready for whatever comes." He talks about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and finally 10. At that moment, an explosion of mana happens around him, causing him to become significantly larger. The transformation is so impressive that she comments that it was even surprising, as she did not expect him to succeed in that absurd and risky method. He, confused and surprised, ends up asking what she said. She replies that it's nothing, and besides, if he did something well, of course, it would now all be properly registered in the status window. This marks the end of the intense preparation and the beginning of the definitive action. It was time to go all out. He must be confident as the real game has finally begun. Despite this confidence, he is visibly tired from using magic for so long without interruption. Exhaustion is evident on his face. Suddenly, intricate magic circles begin to appear around them as she snaps her fingers with precision. He asks, even more surprised, "What was that just now?" She, with a serious look, responds that she believes it was the master's magic, which was trapped in the boundary she carefully created and which spread in an instant, releasing a wave of powerful energy. "It's over well now," she concludes, explaining that the master's magic has dispersed and they would now be attracted to the intense magical energy that had been released. The atmosphere around them is charged with tension and expectation as they prepare for the next step of the mission. Then, a fish appears and the protagonist asks if it was him again. It was an ideal time for an epic confrontation. He equips all his armor, meticulously preparing himself for the battle that was to come. He wanted to take revenge one last time and knew it was time to enter that world and get the first battle off to a flashy start. The protagonist's staff shines brightly. His foot also emits a strong glow, which means that the appearance of the 3 dimensions of magic manifests simultaneously. That sounded really impressive. but it was nothing compared to what was yet to come. The fish then approaches the protagonist, advancing with all its strength. The glow on the protagonist's foot creates magical walls around everything, surrounding the combat environment. Quickly, he prepares himself and launches a powerful attack of magic that hits the fish thousands of times, piercing it in a devastating way. The protagonist comments that he didn't expect this, but that he imagined the end would come much sooner than he thought. He still believes he can do all this, despite not being a battle fanatic. However, that enemy was very weak compared to the protagonist's overwhelming strength. So why wouldn't he try a little more on that sense of struggle to fight back against everything that happened? It would be in that direction, and he thought that was incredible. Well, speaking of the devil, several fish begin to appear, as if they had realized that their companion had died. This was good, as it meant he could try other things. The fish come at the protagonist, who prepares himself with another magic called black magic, a registered technique that allowed him to cast dark spells with ease. He was probably a very skilled artist. Magic was that body's specialty. Well, not just that body, but he was controlling the right body. However, he knew he didn't have much time, as dark magic was much more difficult to control than normal magic. The fish advance furiously, and the protagonist comments that the main characteristic of black magic is absorption. In this case, he snaps his fingers, creating craters in the fish's bodies that end up killing them. It was the first time using the characteristics of black magic, and it really proved brutal. It was a skill that practically bordered on cheating, thanks to absorption, which allowed you to generate and absorb the magical power of enemies. The master could use this power in several ways. He comments that this really was a fraud, that he practically became a fraud. But that was the fine line that helped the protagonist. Either way, he could save the world that way. Now that he had finished the battle and was hungry, it was time to eat. The protagonist was preparing for the next stage, knowing that there was still a lot to be done. So, he prepares with a fire as soon as night falls. She comments that a month has already passed, and, probably, the protagonist has already decided what he is going to do now. Before that, he wanted to ask her something. So, as expected, Monika's identity is probably not the real one. So why did she bring him in the first place? He wouldn't know how to answer that anyway. No matter what happens, the knowledge he has about that world is not enough to help prevent its end on his own. And she knew it from the beginning. It was simply not a very easy mission, but one of the 10-star hero missions. He can't say things like that without reflecting deeply. She puts her hand on her head, looking like she is in pain, and the protagonist asks what is wrong with her, if everything is okay. He says it's natural to worry, anyway. Did they send her forcibly like this? He thinks some things were restricted for her. She could talk about the restriction, but that wasn't true. I could only say that there is a great mind behind all of this. When she mentions this kind of thing, she feels immense pain. The protagonist begins to ask what was happening. She starts coughing up blood and looks at her pathetic condition. She has been reduced by those who control the law, and therefore they do not allow her to say anything. Meanwhile, the protagonist is distressed, not knowing what to do to help. He realizes that the situation is much more complicated than he imagined. Her pain is a reflection of the rigid control that these higher entities exert over her. He feels a mix of anger and helplessness when he sees her in this condition. The tension in the air rises as they try to find a way to overcome this adversity. Even with all the limitations and challenges, the protagonist knows he needs to continue. He looks to the horizon, determined to discover the truth and find a way to free Monika from the control of these dark forces. The night progresses, and the bonfire continues to burn, casting dancing shadows around them, symbolizing the incessant struggle between light and darkness. So he was trying to understand that poor filth. The protagonist sighs, holds the cat, and she asks what is wrong. It was time to take a little care and also a rest. She was going too far. Anyway, this suffering of hers, these injuries, were all because of useless things she did. She apologizes, even though she knows the situation is complicated. They are talking about needing help. For him, it was too much to hear that from her. He realizes he has no choice but to meet Monica in person and ask her directly about all this. But now was not the right time to go to the capital, as there was a tutorial mission there as well. He says that they should come to an agreement about everything that was happening and that there were still many things to observe and resolve. After reaching the capital, he plans to examine everything very well. But when he looks back, he sees that the cat fell asleep very quickly. He smiles, realizing that their friendship was growing stronger. She was the only one he could trust at that moment. Meanwhile, elsewhere, two people are talking. It was the sergeant, who asks the protagonist if he wasn't tired of doing all those things during the month. He responds that he doesn't tire easily. He can do 1,000 things at the same time in a day, and he doesn't see a problem with that. The sergeant acknowledges that he was right. Villages are not something that could be attacked normally, and he would be the first to gain a lot from it. This was the first time they had gone on a mission that month. Okay, he thinks there's a lot of work to be done and a lot of battles to be fought. They agree that they need to be ready for anything, and the protagonist knows that, with the help of the cat and his new allies, they will be able to face the challenges that lie ahead. So, they had to make sure they did everything at the right time. They were injecting mana at that moment and didn't need to die from mana poisoning. Either way, this was good for filling their pockets. However, there was a problem. The person they were looking for had not yet been found. They comment on the test they had carried out in that place and believe that he has probably become monster food by now. The captain comments that they have been walking there for a month now. If he had died, they would have found his dead body somehow and brought him back. They informed the captain that they were being repressed at that time. He was sure it had nothing to do with the laboratory, but moving forward was necessary anyway. It seemed like a punishment if they failed to seek out the operation. Okay, yes, considering they gained everything from the operation, the light was suppressed. This means everyone's heart would be broken. They knew they were facing a complicated situation, but they couldn't give up now. The captain, with a determined look, insists that they must move forward. The mission was crucial, and each step needed to be carefully calculated. They continue to move forward, aware of the risks and the possibility of failure. The atmosphere of tension was palpable, but the determination of each team member was unwavering. They were prepared to face any obstacle, knowing that the success of the mission depended on their courage and skill. Meanwhile, the protagonist reflects on the challenges they have faced so far. He knew that to overcome this adversity, they would need all the resources and knowledge they had. Trust between them was fundamental, and he was determined to protect his companions at any cost. The group prepares for their next move, aware that the battle is not yet over. They were ready for any eventuality, united by the hope of a better future. With light suppressed and hearts broken, they press forward, determined to achieve victory and bring back lost hope. Then, Maria gave the credits to the high-ranking officials. The upper echelons were already picking up on their reputation anyway. She doesn't understand how the human appetite works. They couldn't just separate everyone's energy and bring everyone together. This wasn't immortality medicine. It was just a ridiculous substitution. Okay, let's stop resting, said Maria. Take the kids from the village and bring them all hunting. And you could also bring some adults too. And about the captain, sometimes you have to reward them so they'll obey better. Just make sure you finish all that and transport for the first time. The first shift will follow him, and then they will be at the Campo's base. Well, the tiredness was free now, she continued. Everyone must prepare themselves, for we are going out now for the hunt. Then everyone started to prepare. The truck started to move, and in the meantime, they saw certain people who appeared to be from a tribe. In the middle of them, there were two children who were talking. Don't be nervous, we have something to talk about with those guys, one of the kids said. But it was a lie. They didn't understand why they didn't give weapons to those children. Maybe it was because they weren't considered good enough. They couldn't tell if this was right or wrong. The group in the truck discussed the situation as they approached the tribe. The children seemed worried, but also curious. There was tension in the air, a mix of fear and hope. "We need to be careful what we do next," said one of the officers. "The last thing we want to do is cause a situation we can't control." They continued forward, determined to complete the mission. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the land. The children of the tribe watched silently, not knowing what to expect. Maria and the officers knew they needed to act wisely and carefully. As the truck moved forward, everyone prepared themselves for what was to come. Weapons were checked, strategies revised. Every team member knew the next step would be crucial. As they approached the Campo's base, they knew there was no turning back. It was time to face the challenges head-on, united by the mission ahead. The children, the tribe, and everyone involved were hoping for a resolution that could bring some peace and hope to everyone. So they could go a little deeper. It wasn't dangerous for all of them either. It was time to do all that there and not worry about killing, as they will probably attack everyone. So, don't worry. When this happens, don't go back to the village. But wait a minute, what was the difference between that and dying? The child wonders. She worked hard and would cut down on a lot of the food she would eat, so please don't throw them away. Another child also says that he would hunt anything and would probably grow up to help everyone. But the old man slaps the girl and tells her not to be such an idiot and to just get out of that place. The boy gets angry and says he would be talking to him about it. They shouldn't even think about going back to the village, otherwise they should do the work, as they don't want to kill children either. And well, they would be doing this to also lose some of the food. Do they understand this kind of thing? She asks him if he gets mad asking about understanding. What they want to talk about understanding wasn't to make him laugh. They are all bastards. At that moment, they would be throwing them out of the village. They made everyone work to earn food, and they are simply ashamed of them because they are much younger. And he said not to say that to others because he will leave him. However, he will die there now. The girl screams not to do that kind of thing. The man ends up sticking a spear in the child's stomach, who coughs up blood. The girl wonders what he had done at that moment and asks if the boy was okay,